Hi, I'm Derek Thompson. I'm the business editor at The Atlantic. This is Jesse Eisinger. Along with Frank Partnoy, he wrote the cover story for a January-February issue, What's Inside America's Banks. Jesse, thanks for talking to me.
Happy to be here.
So this story is billed as an adventure story, but it's not a typical adventure story. In it, you and Frank go spelunking through Wells Fargo's financial statements.
Yes.
Why did you choose to go on this particular adventure, and why Wells Fargo?
Yeah, we liken it to Dante's Inferno, going down into lower and lower circles. Well, we chose Wells Fargo because Wells Fargo is such a solid entity. It is the most simple big bank, the simplest big bank, the most trustworthy big bank, ostensibly speaking. And yet what we found was layers and layers of impenetrability. And then what we really delve into is that you can't understand the securities on their balance sheet. And it turns out that this solid mortgage bank, the one that has the stagecoach and has been part of America for 150 years, it turns out that they have enormous trading operations. And trading can be extremely volatile. You can suffer big uncertain losses from it. And it turns out that Wells Fargo gets an enormous amount of its profits from trading, and trading in ways that are not clearly disclosed in any fashion to investors.
Right. A part of it reminded me of the movie In the Loop, which is a satire about Washington planning for the Iraq War. And the fictional name of the committee that's planning this war is called the Future Planning Committee. It's the most perfectly vanilla name possible. And I was reminded of that because you said you guys look into a sector called customer accommodations, which sounds similarly anodyne. Banks obviously have customers. It's in their interest to accommodate them. But what's hiding in there is a little bit nefarious. Talk a bit about that.
Yes, well, it turns out that Wells Fargo made a lot of money accommodating customers. But what does that actually mean? How do you make an enormous amount of money simply standing between a buyer and a seller? Well, it turns out that the way they define this may give them leeway to do all sorts of things that are not really accommodating customers, and in fact might be not allowed under the new Dodd-Frank rules. Under the rules, the Volcker rule, as part of Dodd-Frank, says you can't make bets on your own behalf if you take taxpayer-backed deposits. And so what you have here is an incentive where the bankers make a cost-benefit analysis where they say we can get rewarded for misleading our customers, for trading against our customers, and for misleading our investors. We get to keep our ill-gotten gains, and we have no threat of prosecution. So you would have to change that with real prosecutions and then say there is no threat of prosecution if you have disclosed your risks in a clear way that people can actually understand.
Right. Are there bankers right now sitting in C-suites and boardrooms that should be in jail or in prosecution or would be under these rules?
My view is that banks did engage in criminal activity in the lead up to the financial crisis and after the financial crisis. And there are two broad activities. One is that they misled customers to sell them things that were misrepresented. And then the second activity is that at the height of the crisis, I believe that several banks misrepresented to investors what the assets were worth. Now, why we couldn't have gotten some of the bankers for these kind of activities, very similar to what Ken Lay at Enron and Jeff Skilling were accused of and went to prison for, is a mystery of epic proportion. And a terrible problem for the banking system, because we have eroded confidence in the banks, because we have said to anybody who knows anything about how the banks work, we've said the incentives are all to mislead now. All of your incentives are to mislead your investors and your customers, and there's no incentive that you have to really be honest.